In the charming little subdivision of Oak Haven Grove where your mailbox color required approval and the height of your grass was subject to committee debate, life was supposed to be easy, predictable, peaceful. At least that's what we thought when we moved in. I was drawn in by the cul-de-sacs and the neatly trimmed hedges, the neighborhood cookouts with their overcooked casseroles and those mysteriously identical pies everyone seemed to bake. My husband, Thomas, and I had just retired. This was supposed to be our calm chapter, the place where we could sip coffee, feed the birds, and grow old in peace. What the real estate flyers didn't mention was Cheryl Whitman. Cheryl, our self-appointed HOA president, carried her clipboard like a badge of honor and wore a grin that could curdle milk. She wasn't elected so much as she slid into power when no one else wanted the job. We should have known that was mistake number one. At first, it was small things, notes taped to mailboxes about garbage bin placement, warnings about holiday wreath sizes. Passive-aggressive, sure, but manageable. We laughed it off. Figured maybe Cheryl was just a lonely woman with too much time on her hands. But boredom doesn't explain the fines we started getting. $75 for a mailbox handle that was non-regulation. $200 for an unauthorized paint tone on the garage trim. Suddenly, Cheryl wasn't just a neighbor with a clipboard, she was a dictator with a bylaw manual. She chaired every HOA meeting. She rewrote the voting procedures. She shut down any neighbor who dared to question her vision for Oak Haven Grove. Cheryl wasn't running a neighborhood, she was running a regime. Then she met Vince. Vince Kramer was her boyfriend, a part-time sheriff's deputy with a full-time ego. He wasn't officially part of the HOA, but that didn't stop him from patrolling the block in his cruiser, knocking on doors under the guise of code enforcement. Cheryl had the clipboard. Vince had the badge. Together, they were a one-two punch of arrogance and unchecked authority. For a while, some neighbors tolerated it. Others started locking their gates. Then my son came home. Ryan had served 4 tours overseas. Special forces. The kind of training that teaches you to keep your cool even when the world is burning down around you. He was quiet, kept to himself. Always called me ma'am even though I was just mom to him. Every Sunday he mowed the lawn without fail. Cheryl didn't like him. Said he looked intimidating. Said his pickup truck was oversized for community standards. Said our American flag was aggressive imagery. We ignored her. Until the fines started stacking up. Until Vince showed up on our lawn. It was a sunny Thursday afternoon. Ryan was hanging a bird feeder from the old oak tree by the porch, just a quiet moment, pouring seed into the feeder, his back turned. I was on the porch with my iced tea, enjoying the day. Cheryl came marching up the sidewalk like she owned the pavement. Vince followed 2 steps behind, mirrored sunglasses on, badge glinting on his hip. Violation of Code 6.8b, Cheryl snapped. Unauthorized wildlife attraction devices. Ryan turned slowly, seed still in hand. You serious? That's when Vince reached for his holster and pointed his weapon loaded and ready straight at my son. Ryan didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just stared at Vince, a calm so steady it made my stomach twist. Then he smiled. Not the kind of smile you give a friend. The kind of smile that says you just made the biggest mistake of your life. But to understand how we got to that moment, you need to know the full story. It didn't start with the gun. It started with a hose. The first warning came over a garden hose. Green. Visible from the street. Unauthorized hose color, Cheryl claimed. $75 fine. I was watering roses in 90-degree heat and Cheryl decided my hose disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Strike 2 came when Ryan parked his F-250 in our driveway. Cheryl pounced like a hawk. The tires exceed the parking boundary lines by 2 inches, she declared. We do not allow vehicles that size overnight. It's my family's driveway, Ryan replied, cool as ever. Technically, the front tires crossed the curb, she smiled. We'll be issuing a $170 fine. He didn't argue. He just nodded. Calm. Too calm. And that's when I started getting nervous. Then Vince began tagging along on Cheryl's compliance walks. Suddenly, every neighbor was on edge. Clipboards. Cameras. Random inspections. People started whispering about the HOA's surveillance committee. Ryan stayed quiet. But every night, I saw him at his laptop researching. The man had a file the size of a phone book full of screenshots and dates, all documenting Cheryl's abuses. The bird feeder was the spark that lit the powder keg. Ryan hung it anyway. Cheryl marched over with her clipboard. That's not HOA approved. Ryan pointed out 3 other houses with feeders. They're on the list, she grinned. 3 days later, we got the fine. $300. Ryan didn't flinch. He just said okay. And in Ryan speak, that meant he was planning something. What Cheryl didn't know was that Ryan had spent weeks gathering evidence. Not just on our fines, but on every shady thing Cheryl and Vince had done in Oak Haven Grove. And he wasn't alone. Turns out, the Harts had audio of Vince making inappropriate comments during a compliance visit. The Johnsons had footage of Cheryl yanking up their Halloween decorations, then fining them for yard debris, even misses. Lennox, 84 and blind in one eye, kept a folder of every bizarre citation she'd ever received. Ryan compiled it all. 48 pages of evidence. Labeled. Timestamped. Rock solid. Then he filed a formal complaint with the County HOA Oversight Committee. But he wasn't done. When Cheryl called an emergency HOA meeting, we weren't invited. But Ryan showed up anyway in uniform. Not to intimidate, just as a reminder of who he was. Cheryl stood at the podium, railing about subversive residents and the need for tighter controls. Ryan waited until she finished, then raised his hand. Madam President, he said, calm as ever, could you explain how HOA funds were used to install surveillance cameras pointed exclusively at my family's home without a community vote or permit? Silence. Cheryl blinked. Someone gasped. Ryan produced a printed bank record. Page 6. HOA check number 4889. Security equipment purchased. Installed without authorization. The room erupted. But Cheryl wasn't ready to back down. The next day, Vince and 2 other officers showed up at our front yard. They claimed they were responding to community safety concerns. They ordered Ryan to remove the flagpole we'd had for 8 years. Said it was suddenly a hazard. Ryan refused. That's when Vince did the unthinkable. He unholstered his weapon and pointed it directly at Ryan. No warning. No cause. Just rage and embarrassment. But Ryan was ready. He'd filed for a restraining order 2 days earlier and had been granted a temporary protective order that very morning. Vince had violated that order the moment he stepped onto our property. Worse, he committed assault with a deadly weapon. It was all recorded. Doorbell cam. Chest cam. Neighbor's phone. Within the hour, real deputies, not Vince, were at our door. They didn't come for Ryan. They came for Vince. He was cuffed right there on our lawn. Cheryl screamed, tried to block the view. But no one believed her anymore. Neighbors stepped outside. Some clapped. Ryan picked up Cheryl's clipboard from the ground, read the top page, and smiled. Because wouldn't you know, either was an unauthorized paycheck made out to Cheryl. Triple the allowed stipend. Signed by Cheryl herself. We didn't have to report it. The investigators handled that part. You see, clipboard tyrants like Cheryl never plan for defeat. They plan for domination. But even HOA queens have to answer to the law. And Ryan? Well, Ryan was done playing nice.